Thanks to this scientific approach, the British had achieved something extraordinary. They had brought their entire fleet all the way up the St. Lawrence right to the walls of Quebec without the loss of a single ship. The French couldn't believe their eyes. They had thought it quite impossible that the British ships would make it this far. The British celebrated, reveling in the achievement of their sailors and navigators. Well, they all did except one man. When Wolfe finally laid eyes on Quebec, he realized the true magnitude of the task that still faced him. Wolfe was so dispirited because he was seeing for the first time the imposing cliffs of Quebec. On the only side of Quebec not surrounded by cliffs and rivers, the French had built this wall. One other thing Quebec had was plenty of defenders. There was a core group of around 2,000 or 3,000 professional soldiers. Then a huge number of militiamen turned up, normal Canadians from all over the colony who rallied round to protect the capital city. There were boys as young as 14 and old men. Anyone who could shoulder a musket rushed here to Quebec to fight for their way of life. In charge of this force was Louis-Joseph, Marquis de Montcalm. Given that he was now charged with the defence of Canada, it's ironic that he absolutely hated the place. His letters home to his wife are full of his homesickness for his family and his house in the south of France. He's constantly inquiring after the health of his beloved daughters. He only took the job to ensure his family fortune and a sense of duty as a French nobleman. Montcalm had hoped that the treacherous waters of the St. Lawrence River would stop the British expedition before it ever arrived here at Quebec. But, like all good generals, he'd prepared for the worst. For a month before the British were sighted off Quebec, this area had rung with shovels and pickaxes as thousands of people augmented the defences here, placing new cannon, building barricades and trenches. This is one of the most important features of the French defence, the Royal Battery. Here there were cannon facing out towards the St. Lawrence, able to fire at any ships that attempted to sail through the Narrows. This was a key part of the French plan, preventing the British from reaching the upper part of the river. The British had taken Point Levy on the other side of the Narrows. Today, just a short ferry ride away from Quebec. And from here, they used another weapon shipped all the way from Britain: artillery. At 9 p.m, as the light was falling on the 12th of July 1759, a firework blasted up from here, and that was the sign for the artillery bombardment to begin. At each of the cannon, a blue-coated artillery sergeant marched up, lit the gunpowder, and cannonballs were sent flying towards the town. Now, initially, because the barrels were cold, the British cannonballs were falling short. They weren't reaching the town. They were dropping into the St. Lawrence. And the British soldiers up here could hear the shouts and jeers of the French defenders. But the British cranked up the elevation to the maximum, about 45 degrees, and as the barrels heated up, the cannonballs started to hit home. Not just cannonballs, but explosive mortar rounds, and even things called carcasses, which were big, flaming incendiary bombs, which left a trail like a comet as they arched through the sky. The governor of Quebec estimated that 200 of those incendiary bombs hit Quebec on that first night. For weeks to come, the British bombarded Quebec mercilessly. As this British map shows, their artillery was able to reach right into the city. No part of the town was completely safe. This square, the Place Royale in the lower town, was particularly badly hit. There's a contemporary drawing here which shows the damage. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's not a single house that isn't totally destroyed here. The church in the middle burnt out. There was hardly a building left standing in Quebec. If they hadn't been destroyed by cannonballs, they'd been consumed by fire started by the carcasses. But the people of Quebec were still determined to resist. This enormous use of force against the civilian population of Quebec, so reminiscent of the strategic bombing campaigns of the 20th century, wasn't bringing Wolfe any closer to capturing this town. It was just causing utter misery for the inhabitants.